in a series that we're finishing off this morning called Keeping Up with the Joneses, and it's been all about helping us to get a practical guide to chase Jesus instead of everyone else. And in the first week, I talked about the comparison trap, how we look to the right and how we look to the left, and we're constantly comparing ourselves to others and seeing how we measure up. And I said there's no win in comparison. There's no point, as Andy Stanley says it, there's just no win in comparison. You don't win if you're doing a little bit better or if you're doing a little bit worse than others. There's no place where all of a sudden you're satisfied with who you are and what you've done, because there's always someone further ahead of you and there's always someone further behind you. There is no win in comparison. In the second week, we talked about the fact that we asked the question, when is enough enough? Like, how much more do we need? Do we need a bigger and bigger and bigger television? And somebody so kindly pointed out at my house the other day how big my television was. That it might have just been the largest television that I put up on the screen on that day. So we do have to ask that question, when is enough enough? Apparently 72 inches is enough at my house to watch the World Cup on. Do not tell me the score. How much money would God have to give you before you were content and would give the rest away? That tells you when enough is enough for you. If you could set an amount of money in your mind about how much is enough and then say, God, if you bless me beyond that, and I told you some stories about people that set an amount and then God blew their mind in what that was. But we have a hard time setting that. In fact, all of us think that if we just made $10,000 more, we said, that we'd have enough. Only we make $10,000 more and then that's not enough. And then we make $10,000 more and that's not enough. And it just continues to climb and to climb and to climb. And we never feel like it's enough. And we have to ask that question, when is enough enough? When could I actually be content with what God's given me and give the rest away? And then Pastor Shayla, who's camping this weekend, talked to us about moving from spiritual infancy to spiritual maturity and sang a little song for you, which I will not do because none of you want to hear me sing. But she said, seeking the approval of people and being a Christ follower cannot coexist. That as we're constantly pursuing the approval of others, that we miss out on the one we should be seeking approval from. And this morning, as we finish off this series, we're looking at no longer living in a selfie-centered world. And by that, I have to just take a little picture with all of you this morning, because there are just some things that we seem to have to do in this world, and that is the number of selfies on the internet is just mind-blowing. The number is constantly changing, so I'm not going to throw it out there. But the reality is that we live in a me-first culture. We live in a culture that the pursuit of self and things for self and about self are all-consuming. And everywhere you look, you're constantly seeing things that are getting you to look at yourself and to go, I'm not good enough, or I don't have what they have, or I wish that I had what they have when I look on social media. The polished version of that person that we see on the internet, and we all know that the stories are much more complicated, don't we? I mean, last week we heard 4 stories that told us that we're not any different than anyone else. We are all going through it in life. And so what is the it that is causing this? What is the it that's causing this, that stops you and I from apologizing when we know we're wrong? What is that? What is the it that never lets you admit loss or weakness, that doesn't allow you to want to ask for help from others in those moments that you need it? It insists you prioritize yourself and the things that benefit you all the time. It tells you to feel good when others fail, and that's ugly. And of course, none of us ever think that, I know, but I know we do. It stops you from celebrating the success of others, especially that person at work that got your promotion, because you deserved it, not them. It keeps you arguing an invalid point just to have the final word. It prevents you from admitting you need help. What do you think this is? It encourages dishonesty with yourself and others because of your discomfort with the complete truth. It keeps neighbors, church people from realizing they need the cross more than anything else. What is it? What is the it? What do you think it is? Ego. That's good. Fear. It's pride. And ego. Yeah. It's pride. Pride, and not the good kind of pride, not the I'm proud of you, I put my kids' coloring on the refrigerator proud. It's not the, hey, you did a good job in your recital proud. It's not the, I'm so proud of my puppy who just finally sat for the first time when I told them to because I gave them 10 treats. It's not that kind of pride. It's the ugly kind of pride none of us are proud of. It's that arrogance. It's that ugly kind of pride that's inside of us. It's the pride that stops us from admitting anything because we don't really want to be known. We don't want people to know the absolute truth, and so we don't admit things. It stops us from apologizing to those that we need to apologize to and to actually repent and turn a corner and change our direction. It is pride that stops us from acknowledging our privilege and opportunity that we have over others. Pride causes us to think, no, I deserve this. I earned it. I worked harder than everybody else. And so the opportunities that I have here in this nation as one of the top 20 earning nations in the world tell us that, in fact, the poverty line in Canada is higher than the global income of the top 1% of people. So the top 1% of wage earners globally earn over $48,000 a year, and in Canada, that's bordering on the poverty line globally. And so we have an incredible privilege and opportunity living here in this country, and yet we worked for it, we earned it, we deserve it. It stops us from affording to be generous in ways that allow us to say enough is enough. And yet as Christ followers, as those who would actually want to combat this, who would actually say, I want to live in the ways of Jesus. I want to live differently. I want my life to look differently. I want it to be emulating the person of Jesus. We get a very different picture from him. In fact, the Apostle Paul talks about Jesus' incarnation in Philippians 2, 3-11 to the church there, addressing this very issue as if he knew that people were going to struggle with this in emulating the life of Christ, that people were going to actually choose a me-first mindset over the way of Jesus. And so Paul says this to us. He says, look, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Nothing. Nothing. Not some things, not a few things out of selfish ambition, because we're all kind of like, there's areas, there's pieces of my life that I can have a little selfish ambition in, right? Like, I can kind of control this corner of my life. Rather, in humility, value others above yourself. not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. And I love that this is my wife's favorite verse. Right? I mean, we just want it to be everybody's favorite verse other than ours. It's like, this verse is good for you, but for me, this is hard. We must destroy our me first mindset to truly follow Jesus, because practically speaking, no selfish ambition means that we're celebrating others' successes at work at all times. We're celebrating others. You know, in Christian circles, I often find that when people talk about their success, people don't cheer for them. They don't celebrate it. Particularly in Canadian culture, we don't even celebrate the success of other churches or other ministries or other people. We think there's something wrong with it. We're suspect of it. We downplay it. We degrade it. There's no vain conceit, no fashion comparison for some of you in our midst. There's a humility, a spirit of submission to others' will over our own, which is what humility is a spirit of submission to others' will over our own. Which most of us go, no, my will, thank you very much. We value others above ourselves, practically speaking, honoring them in our actions, putting others' interests first. What is the best course of action for them, not you? How do we actually elevate the position of others around us and celebrate them? I mean, if a community of people actually transform themselves to look like the posture of Jesus in this, how fun would it be to be part of that community? How amazing would it be to be part of a community where everybody is trying to put one another first and elevate one another and create the best opportunities for one another, kicking doors open for one another, creating opportunities for one another, giving so generously that somebody gets to go to Thailand. I mean, I'm beginning to see the rumblings of that here in our midst, and I am blessed. Because you cannot follow pride and Jesus at the same time. So many people try. So many people try to follow pride and Jesus. It's like I follow Jesus when it's convenient to follow Jesus, and I follow what I want to do when I want to do it. And so there is this tension going on in our hearts. In your relationships with one another, Paul says, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus. He's saying, church in Philippi, create a community like this. Create a community in your relationships with one another that have the same mindset of Christ. And what was that approach? Who, being in very nature God, who was the self-existing one, who was the pre-existing one, humbled himself and did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. He didn't think it was for himself. He actually thought it was for others. And this morning, we've given out a small slip of paper, and I'm going to walk you through a little exercise that's going to get you thinking. And if you haven't got one of these slips of paper, Charlene is going to just grab some and some pencils there, and we're going to walk you through this little exercise to think about some things that maybe we're not thinking about. There is no number line, as the screen says. It is just to mark positive or negative on your piece of paper, because I wrote this earlier in the week and realized it wasn't going to work on the paper. So if you take your slip of paper and you've got it and you've got something to mark it down, you're going to mark it as positive if it's true of you, and -1 in the if it's not true of you. If you're right-handed, move one spot forward or right. So, sorry, if you're right-handed, add 1, plus 1. I don't think we realize that right-handedness is a privilege, but it is. It's an incredible privilege to have. If English is your first language, plus 1. If one or both of your parents have a college or university degree, or you have more than 50 books in your house, plus 1. If you rely or have relied primarily on public transportation, minus 1. Yep. If you can find Band-Aids designed to blend in with your skin tone at the mainstream stores, plus 1. If your household employs cleaners, landscapers, snow removal, contractors, etc., plus 1.
What if you live somewhere with a
That's plus 1. If you were ever made fun of or bullied for something you could not change or was beyond your control, minus 1. If you studied the culture of your ancestors in elementary school, plus 1. If your family has ever left your homeland or entered another country not on your own free will, plus 1. If you ever had to skip a meal or went hungry because there was not enough money to buy food, minus 1. If you have a visible disability or invisible illness or disability, minus 1. If your family has health or dental benefits, plus 1. If you were ever discouraged from an activity because of race, class, ethnicity, gender, or disability, minus 1. If you came from a family with a struggle such as substance abuse, mental illness, or an absentee parent, minus 1. If you can make a mistake without having people attribute the behavior to flaws in your racial or gender group, plus 1. The highest score possible is 8. The lowest score is minus 7. Add up your score. I'm not going to ask you to say it out loud, don't worry. This isn't meant to shame you or to make people feel inferior or not. It's to help us to recognize that we don't all start from the same place. I have privilege. My score is 8. This isn't about inducing guilt. It's not about recognizing, it's just about recognizing systemic, undeserved privilege. I have had opportunities being born in Canada to the parents that I had, to the schools I was able to attend, that other people just don't have. None of us began in the same place in life with the same opportunities. And the question is, how can I give up or leverage my privilege for the benefit of others? Because all of us in Canada have some level of privilege. We have some level of privilege that others just don't have. And Jesus is, when he talks about allowing us to love our neighbor as ourselves, or as Paul is calling us, to consider others better than ourselves in the way that Jesus did, he's calling us to this. To use our privilege as Jesus did, coming from heaven to earth to benefit others, not himself. The life of Jesus emulated this particular characteristic in a way that is massively life-changing. It lowers pride, because he could have come down in all of his glory, declared himself king, and made us all bow before him. But he chose to come in human form, born in a manger, in a humble place, and to submit his life even to death on a cross for your benefit and mine. And he calls us into that way of life. He calls us into an others first. Paul says, rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. Jesus humbled himself in every way in order to serve others. And the question I have is, when was the last time you humbled yourself to serve someone else? I'm not talking about just doing something for somebody else, but actually humbled yourself to serve someone else. That it actually required you to take on a different posture that you weren't comfortable with to serve them. That's what Jesus did for you and for I. Paul continues, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. He initiated reconciliation with others. Jesus was right, and yet he was wronged, and yet he initiated reconciliation. For most of us, when we're wronged, we want justice rather than mercy, unless it's for us. Pride says wait. Jesus says initiate. He says move forward into those relationships and transform them. Pride repels, but love reconciles. Pride stops us from, and you can fill in the blank with whatever it is that you're thinking about right now. But Jesus calls us to reconcile. Jesus calls us to admit when we're wrong, to apologize to others, to acknowledge our privilege and use it for the benefit of others, to afford to generously share what we have with him and others, even at a personal cost. Paul continues, therefore God exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name above every other name, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue acknowledge that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. And one day every knee will bow, not just should bow, but one day, but we can choose to do that now. We no longer are called to live in this self-centered world, but we're called to live very differently in the community of the church. This letter is a letter that Paul is speaking to a church in Philippi and saying, take on the posture of Christ with one another in your relationships. Take on this posture of love and submission and wanting the best for one another, opening doors for one another, creating opportunities for one another, elevating one another to the highest place that you can. That is what he is inviting them into, to be the church. And as we talk about our values of being relationship focused, we're talking about loving one another in these ways, of giving space for one another to journey and celebrating the intentional diversity in which God has created for us to learn from. To be postured for worship, to submit ourselves to him, and to choose to partner when other people are doing things better, to celebrate what they're doing and to join in with them rather than to need to do it on our own. And so this fall, we're inviting you to go deeper into this community in all kinds of different groups. The advanced group that's starting up on Thursday nights, Big Book Recovery that's going on, our home group in the East End, Bible study, Life's Healing Choices, Alpha Marriage is starting, and the youth group is starting back up on Thursday nights. And so if there is a place to find community and to go deeper with one another in, we want to encourage you to find that space. And to serve and to find that place to submit to one another in service. And we'd love your help, particularly in two areas this fall that we're in need of. One is kids ministry. We need people to serve once a month, and we need people for set up and tear down once a month. All of the ministries are just asking for once every 4 weeks or 10 times a year, not even 12. So if there is space for you to be able to do that, we would love for you to do that. There's some special things coming up as well. The Outrageous Love Conference that is happening, the John Festival in October, and we need people to, all of the high schools in the area are getting their volunteer hours, and we need some adults to get police check to be able to supervise the teenagers as they're volunteering in our community. And if you're able to do that, it would be amazing. Many of you have had dinner with a refugee family in the past year, and I want to encourage you to continue to sign up with Roger to do that. And if you haven't had an opportunity to make a meal with a refugee family, I'm telling you it's going to be just an incredible blessing to you and to be a part of that. Scott is leading our team, volunteering in the seniors' homes, visiting with seniors that have nobody else visit with them. And if you want to be part of that, and once a week or once a month, go in and visit a senior that has nobody visit them in a year, we would love to have you join Scott in his ministry in doing that. We have Scott, can you just raise your hand? I can't even see you this morning. There's Scott right there. You can talk to him this morning about that. And many of you know that we've adopted two churches, African church called Spirit of Life Church and Casa Sombra La Roca in Gatineau, that is a Spanish-speaking church. And if you want to just go on a Sunday afternoon and be present in that church and experience their church and to bless them and to be present, they would love to have you join them some Sunday. And of course, our ministry with the Barhaven Food Cupboard. We also are starting church services this fall at Waterford Grand once a month, and if you want to be a part of that, we need a couple people to serve in that area. Really want to encourage you to sign up for that evangelism training course, September 22nd and 23rd. Dr. Bill Hogue is one of the most spirit-led, funny communicators and been my mentor for over 20 years, so I encourage you to get to be a part of that training, as well as all of our global partners and national partners and different ways to serve amongst us. We live in a selfie-centered world, but Jesus calls us to more. He calls us into relationship with one another that submits to one another's will and celebrates one another and lifts one another up, and also to serve one another. And so let us be a community that emulates the life of Jesus.